we're going to talk about non-engine. And I guess it's fitting because we just looked at one of the most powerful non-engine hand traps that is about to release in the next or second next set. We're going to do it in the form of a tier list, but I want to more so keep it as like a discussion where we're going to talk about the individual cards and talk about in which matchup they're useful and so on and so forth. Of course, the format hasn't officially started yet, so what I am basing this off of is my first impression of what the format is going to be, which I've made a video on a couple of days ago. So the main decks that we're going to evaluate this non-engine against is like, of course, Branded Draco Tail is a top tier deck to be expected. Radiant Typhoon, Vanquish Soul Canine, maybe some applications for Lunalight or Sky Striker, which are predicted to be a little bit less popular, but I still like them. Mitsurugi is a thing, Crystron K9, and then we've got the rest, which is basically more like roguish strategies. But I think the most important decks to take into account when we're discussing this non-engine is Draco Tail, Radiant Typhoon, Vanquish Soul and other K9 variations, Mitsurugi, maybe some Branded Sky Striker, Lunalight, right? Now, those are the decks that we are expecting. I've heard that some people are experimenting with different Yummy variations of some of these decks as well. You know, people are messing around with Radiant Typhoon Yummy. People are messing around with Yummy Tri-Brigade. People are messing around with Sulfur Court Yummy still. So those are a consideration when we're going to talk about these cards. But personally, I think they are less relevant than, let's say, Draco Tail or pure Radiant Typhoon, right? So that is the baseline that we're going to talk about non-engine for. And in general, I guess the biggest distinguish that we always have to make between these cards is like, how effective are hand traps in the current format? How effective are board breakers? And I guess what is the right approach if you're going into this format? And I will say, if we're looking at the top tier decks here, it depends, because of course you can basically always pick between, I would say, 3 approaches when it comes to your non-engine. Number 1 approach is you want to try and stop your opponent from playing as best as you can by using a bunch of these low impact hand traps, quote unquote, is what people call them. And you try to basically force your opponent to pass the turn with as little of a board as possible, if not nothing, right? And that's where cards like, let's say, Impulse, Ash, Mourner, Veiler, Imperm, that's where those cards come in, right? Where you try to not let your opponent play at all, right? Then we have the other extreme, which is we are trying to let our opponent full combo and then break their board, right? This is where board breakers come in, but also cards like the Molcharmies can have synergy with that strategy, because you can just throw a Molcharmy, then draw a bunch of cards, and if they make the full board, you're going to draw into board breakers and you're going to break that board. And then the more realistic approach is like somewhere in the middle, right? You don't want your opponent to full combo because the full combo board is hard to break. But you also don't want to like try to hand trap them to death, because quite frankly, there just aren't enough good hand traps to do that. And maybe the current decks in the format aren't weak to that. And if we look at the current top tier decks, I think there is a valid argument to be made that the correct place to be right now, of course, this depends a little bit on which deck you're playing, is somewhere in the middle. And I'll talk about that before we analyze the individual cards. The reason why I feel that way is because a couple of decks in the format here are incredibly hard to full stop, right? If we're talking Draco Tail, right? This is something, if you've watched me play Draco Tail on Master Duel Ranked, for example, trying to stop Draco Tail completely with a deck like Odeon, for example, which falls into the category of, I want to stop my opponent from playing completely, it doesn't always work, to say it lightly, you know? Like, if my opponent has a 5 mana in their opening hand, and then they activate that 5 mana when they're going first, there is no card that negates that, except for Cyframe Gear Gamma, which isn't realistic because it's at 1. So when my opponent activates 5 mana and resolves it, I can Imperm the Arthalion, I can maybe Ash the Ketu, but I'm basically playing catch-up at this point, because they're going to walk away with the card advantage, they're going to have board presence, it's not going to be possible to stop it completely. So when you look at Branded Draco Tail, is this a deck that you can reliably full stop? I would argue the answer is no. Of course, there is hands where they start with Lucius, you imperm it, and they don't have a play. That happens sometimes because they only have 1 Ketu. There is not that many spells that they can have to extend. However, they have the new Albaz now, which is also an access to a fusion summon, right, via Cartesia. So, you know, they just have more starters with the new Albaz as well, as long as they draw Draco Tail names. So full stopping the Draco Tail deck is going to be tough. The same is true for K9 Vanquish Soul, right? With 3 Stake Your Soul and 3 Raisin now, you can imagine it's going to be hard to full stop Vanquish Soul from playing the game entirely, right? Because you Ash the Raisin, they activate Azuna, and you're already in a bad spot because they're going to apply a lot of pressure on you. The Raisin turns into a Rock of the Vanquisher, and they play from there. So playing a deck that completely relies on stopping the opponent isn't great against that deck either. The one deck that this can work against, in my experience, is Radiant Typhoon. Radiant Typhoon is a deck that you can stop with the low impact hand traps because the deck doesn't have that many starters. We're going to discuss the individual ways to stop that deck in a second, but like trading 1-for-1 with their starters can work because they don't have that many. A similar thing applies to like K9 Crystron. You don't want to try to stop those with Veilers and Mourners and Ogres and Imperms because the deck is just way too efficient at that. And I also think the same is true for Mitsurugi. Mitsurugi you can stop with hand traps, but you need very specific ones, so not every deck can do it. You would have to be able to play cards like Impulse or Psyframes to just negate their spell cards, right? So that is that. The other extreme of fully breaking the board, of relying fully on board breakers, has 2 problems in the current format. The first problem is that there are some decks that are weak to board breakers, and we'll talk about that, but there's other decks that are not. K9 Crystron, you're not going to board break that. Lunalight, you are probably not board breaking that. Radiant Typhoon, possible, maybe. Vanquish Soul, possible. Draco Tail, possible. But, you know, decks like Lunalight, K9 Crystron, Mitsurugi as well, to an extent, really hard to board break because it's really resilient. It's got back row. Like, they're really layered. It's really hard to board break those decks if you just let them full combo, right? So in my opinion, my first analysis, my first impression of the new format, the testing I've done for YCS Dortmund, in reality, you want to be somewhere in the middle. You want to be playing a strategy that can interact with certain things your opponent is trying to do. Let's say you want to be able to throw like an Imperm into the mix when they are Thalion add back, or you want to Ash the Rahu, or you want to Imperm the Crocea or whatever. Or ideally, of course, we're going to have to talk about those as well. You want to throw a Charmy into the mix to basically, you're not stopping your opponent from playing. You're just saying like, the more you do, the more resources I'm going to have. So Charmies are going to be a viable way to do this. And then you also want to like, you want to have strong engine hands to play into their boards, because quite frankly, most of the time you're going second in this format unless you get really lucky. Your opponent is going to have a board. It is really hard to stop these decks from playing entirely, which, by the way, is one of my favorite things about this format. It's one of my favorite aspects of this format is that, from my experience, there's very few negate gameplay going on where you just negate everything your opponent does and then they pass the turn with nothing. That happens very rarely. It does happen sometimes, but it's not the norm in this format. Realistically, and I guess that's bad news for some people, you're gonna have to play some Yu-Gi-Oh when you're going second. You can't just Ash Imperm and then expect your opponent to pass and die to 1 card. Most of the time, you're gonna have to actually play the game when you're going second, which is my impression of the format so far, which is good. I have enjoyed my testing a lot so far. Essentially, that's what we're going to be evaluating cards by today, is how good are these cards if Yu-Gi-Oh is actually being played. Let's start with a pretty obvious one. Molchami Fuwalos goes into the top tier category. It is in some ways better and also worse than before, because I do think that there are some decks in the format right now that Molchami Fuwalos is not that crazy against. That includes decks like Radiant Typhoon, decks like Draco Tail. Fuwalos is not the most insane card ever against those decks, right? They are not decks that will literally crumble to a Fuwa and you completely win the game if you resolve it. Once again, it perfectly like illustrates the point I just made. Activating Fuwa against Draco Tail does not win you the game. Activating Fuwa against Radiant Typhoon does not win you the game. They have very, very solid intermediate boards that they can make. You're still gonna have to play Yu-Gi-Oh after the Molchami. You just don't get handed the game for free, right? It's not Max C after all. But it does help a lot with making the board more breakable and also giving you 1 or 2 extra cards, because especially with the new Albaz card, you're gonna get 1 or 2 draws from the Molchami Fuwalos most of the time, but it's not just about how many cards you draw, it's also what it's preventing, right? And this card is more effective at preventing certain actions or certain boards than negation hand traps, right? Like there's no reason to negate Rahu Draco Tail when they're not activating Rahu Draco Tail because they're under Fuwa. You get what I'm saying? If I put my opponent under a Molchami Fuwalos, I might not be gaining a lot of cards this format, but I'm disincentivizing my opponent from resolving their full potential, which is very valuable. Radiant Typhoon is the same thing. Radiant Typhoon in its full combo can summon like 3 or 4 times into Fuwa, but realistically, if you do activate the Fuwa, you're gonna get 1 or 2 draws, right? Because they want to make the Link 2 for Radiant Typhoon all the time. That's 1 draw. And then if they really want it, they can resolve Megala to summon 1 from the deck. In the full combo, they would maybe make another Link 3, like the Wind Link 3 that shuffles your stuff into the deck, from the grave into the deck, or they might make a rank 3 Totem Bird or something. Under Fuwa, they're not going to do that. But once again, we got to evaluate in the grand scheme of things. This is going to give us 2 cards, and they are not going to make another disruption. So it's a lot of value from Fuwa still, right? Like we just have to move away from this mentality of Molchami Fuwalos wins us the game all the time, because it doesn't do that, but it makes it way more playable when you're going second. So I think it's still a top tier card. And also it has the added benefit of if you run into a full combo pile that someone chooses to play for whatever reason, it becomes, of course, a much more valuable card. You know, if you run into, I don't know, Fiend Slop or anything that has Spenta in it, right? Like if someone decides, I want more Sealing, K9 Crystron, or whatever, normal summon Noroi effect, and so on, then Fuwa, of course, becomes crazy. So it is a solid card that is not required to win against the best decks in the format, but it helps, and it gives you that kind of like safety. It's like a safety measure against the more combo heavy decks in the format. So really good card, of course, but I wanted to give a little bit more insight on that. Molchami Purulia, significantly weaker than Molchami Fuwalos, but I do think overall it is still a strong card that is a consideration even in main decks this format. This is mainly, and this is something we're going to talk about later, is that I personally feel like a lot of the generic low impact hand traps are not great this format. We're going to talk about that in a second, but in general, I am not a fan of the one-on-one negates in this format. Some of them are still pretty usable, but all things considered, if you want to prevent your opponent from full comboing going second, I think it's better to put them under a Molchami than to try and negate what they're doing. And Molchami Purulia is kind of like Fuwa Light in this format, because Draco Tail, realistically, if they're just doing Draco Tail things, they can give you 0 draws if they really want to. Realistically, because they play the new Albaz and Cartesia and Lucius and Molulu, there's a good chance they want to normal summon and use one of those cards, so you get your card back. And then as a bonus, if they do play Spenta, or if they draw a normal summon and the Albaz, then they're gonna have to choose and make a little bit of a weaker board, or you get 1 extra card. So realistically, this is not going to be that crazy against Draco Tail, but worst case, you're probably getting your card back. If it was just for Draco Tail, you wouldn't play this card though, but it definitely helps. It's like a safety measure to also be covered against decks like Radiant Typhoon. This card is better against Radiant Typhoon than Fuwalos. That's the one matchup where this card is crazy. But then it also is good against everything K9, of course. So I think this card is strong overall, and I think if you're not happy with the performance of cards like Imperm, Veiler, and so on and so forth, then looking at Purulia is a very valid option even for the main deck, especially if your deck has a way to discard it. Like Draco Tail being able to fuse it for Arthalion is a good argument to play the card in the main deck. If you play any Yummy version where you can discard it for Cupsy Yummy Way, that's okay, right? So I think this card is still pretty solid, but not like as crazy as it was or not as required as it was in previous formats, like when we're talking like Ryzeal top tier or Malice, right? This card is a little bit weaker now, but still good. And then we've got Meowls. Personally, not convinced by Meowls yet. This card is at maximum a side deck card. But even there, I'm not sure where I see its applications, right? Like, it's not good against Draco Tail, not good against Radiant Typhoon, not good against Vanquish Soul Canine. Crystron maybe is a little bit annoyed by it, but also not that great. I think it starts being more relevant when you look at like Mitsurugi variations, maybe some of the Yummy variations if they summon from grave a decent amount, but even there, I don't think it's that great. I think Meowls is losing a lot of its appeal with less Malice in the format. It's decent against Lunalight, but honestly, against Lunalight, there's other more like higher quality cards. It's not a terrible card for some of the rogue matchups, but I don't think it has a very high priority in them. So that's your baseline for the Charmies. Let's talk about some of the more like one-on-one hand traps. All right. Dominus Impulse. Dominus Impulse is, in a theory, still a pretty top tier card. Now, of course, some of the lower impact hand traps, like I said, felt pretty mediocre to me. Impulse is an exception to that because Impulse is just so powerful that you will still find good choke points for it because it can basically negate all the most powerful things in the format. Even if it doesn't stop your opponent from playing completely, it still mitigates the board. Let's say against Draco Tail, you can decide to just negate the Rahu. The Rahu is usually... let's say an average Draco Tail turn, if they draw a couple of Draco Tail names, they would go for like, let's say activate Phimena, fuse 2 names. They would set Rahu and Ketu for another Draco Tail, and then activate Rahu to fuse 2 and get 2 traps. If you impulse that Rahu, you're stopping not only the fusion summon, you're also stopping 2 traps at part of the end board. And then you're not stopping them from playing completely. They will still have setup, but you are now better off when you're playing into the board. I think the biggest problem with Dominus Impulse is which decks can play it. There's not actually that many decks that can facilitate Impulse, but I think it is a strong option in the decks that can. It is still a strong reason to play pure Mitsurugi over Mitsurugi hybrids is the ability to play Dominus Impulse. So if your deck can play this card, you probably should, is basically what I'm trying to say. Which overall is going to make it not a very popular card this format because most decks cannot, but the decks that can play it, you should expect to see it, and I would say you should also play it. Like if you're playing pure Mitsurugi, you should play Dominus Impulse, right? Dominus Purge, on the other hand, is like as it usually is like an Impulse light, similar to comparing Fuwa to Perulia. The card is strong by all means, but it is just like less potent than Dominus Impulse. In the same, where we can use the same example with the Draco Tail deck that you're going second against, right? In that line, you cannot negate the Rahu. You can negate the Ketu and hope they don't have a Draco Tail in hand, or you can just hold it for your turn to stop 1 trap, but you can't stop 2. So it's just a little bit worse of a Dominus Impulse in that matchup. Slightly better against Radiant Typhoon. So I think it's kind of funny how similar these two, like Impulse to Purge, the comparison is kind of similar than Fuwa to Perulia, because I think against Radiant Typhoon, Purge is probably better than Impulse. Similar, Perulia better than Fuwa in that matchup, but like it's obviously not the only matchup to consider. I think in most other matchups, Impulse is better than Purge. Of course, you usually don't play both together. So the same thing that applies to Dominus Impulse also applies to Dominus Purge. If your deck can play it, you should think about it and you should definitely expect it. But I'll give you an example, right? Like every single pure Mitsu I've seen plays Dominus Impulse because obviously you do. Not every single Radiant Typhoon I've seen plays Dominus Purge because there's other alternatives that sometimes feel more valuable. You know, some people have felt like more quick play spells, more board breakers, other non-engine felt better than Dominus Impulse. So Dominus Purge. All things considered, strong card, consideration in every deck that can play it, but not as set in stone as Dominus Impulse. Dominus Spiral, pretty mid, I would say. Probably. I mean, once again, there's not many decks that can play it, and removal is not great in the current format. So probably just a nah, straight up nah. Bouncing a card from a Draco Tail board after they've already set up entirely is not great. Bouncing a card from a Radiant Typhoon board after they've already set up completely is not great. The impact on this card is just severely lacking. It's just another matter of, well, negating is more convenient than actually interacting with your opponent on the baseline of removal, which is just not great. Okay, Nibiru. Nibiru is a solid card this format. I think it's a little bit underrated right now. I think most people I've seen prioritize other non-engine over it, particularly because people are under the impression that this card is bad against Dracotail. Personally, I think it's a little bit better than people give it credit for. It depends on your deck though, because once again, this card will not stop the Dracotail player from making a solid endboard. They will still have a decent amount of interruptions on your turn. I think there is one particularly important use case for this card that I've observed in Dracotail mirror matches. First of all, it's a great card to have in your hand going first because it makes it so that you can really aim for the grind game. You can really focus on value plays in the mirror because you know they can't kill you when you have an Nibiru in hand. And it's also a lot more common for Dracotail to play into this card now because of the new Albaz or Spenta. Whenever they commit to those plays, especially when you go first and you have a board already, it's going to be very easy to make the Nibiru live and stop them from going for game, and you can just focus on follow-up and win the game through that angle. The other point where I found it to be very valuable is because a lot of people are starting to make Secretarion Dragon turn 1 in order to like be safe against the opponent's 5 mana. It's a very crucial part in the mirror match to summon Secretarion when you're going first. A very common strategy. Also because Nibiru is not very popular, and then Nibiru actually has a decent amount of value. Now the thing is, even if your opponent plays into it on the first turn, it's not even that crazy of a punish, because realistically, if they start with the Albaz stuff, they still have so much, right? They still have the Dracotail traps. They have 5 mana in hand. They have Albion in the graveyard because they started with Albaz, so they're gonna have the Fallen and the Virtuous. And they also have the Ecclesia and the Black Dragon returning in the end phase, which is more disruptions on your turn as well. So Nibiru by no means is like a hard punish if they decide to go for a Secretarion line. But if you're playing Dracotail yourself, it makes the game a lot more playable if you don't have to play into a Secretarion as soon as your turn starts, right? So it's so-so. I think it's still a solid card in Dracotail specifically to counter Secretarion in the mirror match. But outside of that, I wouldn't really recommend it in the main deck. You can play it in the side deck, but once again, most of the combo decks in the format, the Nibiru is only good against if you pair it with other low impact hand traps like Imperm Veiler or whatever, anything that forces Ripper or whatever. And then once again, those cards are just not that great, I think. So Nibiru is solid, but not too crazy. Dimension Shifter is a strong card. This format, it goes without saying, of course. Dimension Shifter always has reason to be played. I don't think it's top tier just because, I mean, it's of course it's Dimension Shifter. We don't have to spend too much time talking about it, but realistically the card is S tier against Dracotail. But there is a couple of decks in the format where it doesn't win you the game on the spot, which is, I mean, oh, Shifter doesn't auto win, I know, crazy. But Vanquish Soul, Radiant Typhoon is annoyed by it, but it doesn't completely die to it immediately. And Vanquish Soul also has ways to deal with it, and K9 as well. So like it's still really strong, and honestly, all that this means is if your deck can play it, you either main it or you side it. You still side it at the very minimum. Like every deck that can play Shifter probably still plays Shifter. It's just a question of is it main or side, basically. Also, Mitsurugi doesn't care that much, yeah. So decks like Mitsurugi that can play it either main or side. But I'm leaning more towards side deck unless you really are scared of mainly Dracotail. Then you can easily main deck it. Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom is top tier. Probably the best quote-unquote one-on-one negation hand trap in the format right now. Not really because of its going second capabilities, but because it's just more convenient. If, like we talked about it earlier, Charmies give your opponent a chance going second, and it's just more convenient if you can just Ash it and win the game on the spot, right? Just go full combo and your opponent has 4 cards, win the game, easy clap, add it back to your hand with Arthalion on top of it. Very convenient card. I will say that this format, this card going second is actually a little bit better than in previous formats. it's still gonna feel really bad and gambly against everything with K9, and it's not that great against Radiant Typhoon unless they have one starter and then you ash it and then they pass, which can happen. But going second in general, it feels pretty gambly. The only exception for that is Draco Tail. In the Draco Tail matchup, this card actually has some great applications and some great choke points that you can choose from when you go second, depending on your hand. You can do the same thing that we talked about with Dominus Impulse earlier. You can negate Rahu to stop them from getting some of their trap cards. Or you can also hold it for your turn if you really care about one of the traps in particular. Let's say you really care about Flame because you have a really important card, a spell in your hand that you need to resolve. You can hold Ash for Flame and then play into the board. Now, that aspect of the card has gotten a little bit weaker because Draco Tail now has stronger end boards on average with the new Albaz, so ashing a Flame does no longer feel that impactful if you still have to deal with the other two traps, Phimena and Volnet the Virtuous and the Albaz stuff on your turn. So it's not as good anymore going second as it used to be against Draco Tail, and in the other matchups it's still gambly, but overall still one of the better balanced like one-on-one hand traps, I guess. But going first, completely disgusting when you negate Charmies, or when you make a board your opponent starts playing and you just ash Ketu or something. So yeah, Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit is solid. There's a few applications for this card that I want to mention. You can hit a pretty key thing in most meta decks right now. You can hit Vanquish Soul start against Vanquish Soul if they didn't start with K9. If they started with K9, then they can just negate it with Ripper, but then you can potentially punish them with like a Nibiru, so they have to think twice about doing that. So hitting that is good. You can hit the Radiant Typhoon trap, which is okay. If they end on the link too, they can get it back, which is annoying, but then you still stop some part of its effect. But Ghost Ogre for that is decent. And then against Draco Tail, if they start with Albaz, you can Ghost Ogre the new Ecclesia Synchro, because that card has to successfully banish itself until the end phase to summon from the deck. So you can prevent the access to Cartesia that way, which sometimes that's good enough. Sometimes that's their only way to play. And even if it's not, then you're still getting rid of some valuable grind game for them because they don't have the Ecclesia in rotation. It goes to the grave. They can put it back from the grave into the extra deck with its own effect, but for now, you don't have to deal with it. So the Ghost Ogre can be solid in those matchups. It's also pretty good against Lunalight to hit one of the Pendulum Scales or Masquerade. So all things considered, I think Ghost Ogre has a place in this format if those choke points that I just mentioned are valuable to you. Right? Against Mitsurugi, it's a completely dead card, pretty much. So that matchup, unless you can hit a IP Masquerena with it going second, but that's very minor. But yeah, wanted to mention it out there. I think Ghost Ogre has gotten a little bit better than in previous formats. So yeah. Ghost Mourner and Snow Rabbit is also a solid card in this format because of two reasons. First of all, it deals with Arthalion, which is nice, similar to an Effect Veiler or an Imperm. And the other thing is that it's the only one thing it does over Veiler is that it can hit Crocea if they activate a Radiant Typhoon quick play spell in the draw phase to play around Veiler and Droll and Lockbird. So Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill is actually considered to be a little bit stronger than Veiler for those purposes. Yeah, that is neat. Undodgeable also. What you mean is because I don't have a spell trap, they cannot self-pop the Crocea. Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So that's what makes it even better than Imperm in that matter, right? Because if you chain Imperm, you have a spell trap, then they can use Fallen to pop the Crocea, and then it will actually get destroyed. Okay, I get it. Yeah, no, Mourner is solid. The only thing that's really bad about Mourner is, of course, the TCG rulings surrounding hand triggers, which makes it significantly weaker on your own turn because you can't negate Arthalion with it, or if they do the Crocea on your turn, the triggers don't work out because it would be Chainlink 1 and then the Crocea would be Chainlink 2. That is honestly really, really annoying. And I would be pissed if that ever happened to me. So I'm still not rating Mourner very highly, but I see the advantages for it. I think it's worth considering. If you want to go that route of playing some negation hand traps, then Mourner is okay. I actually found it to be better than Veiler. I think Veiler is like It's never a terrible card in a format with Draco Tail because hitting Arthalion ultimately is pretty decent. And of course, being able to hit normal summons over special summons, with which you can only hit with Mourner, being able to negate normal summon Cartesia or normal summon Mululu or normal summon Lucius like can have value sometimes if you want to take that gamble. Normal summon a Radiant Typhoon sometimes when you have back row. Veiloring it is pretty nice. I've not been a big fan of either of these. I did think Mourner was a little bit better than Veiler because of the draw phase applications against Radiant Typhoon, but both of these mid, I would say. Like they're not bad, but they're also not great. Ghost Bell. Ghost Bell is solid. Once again, as I said earlier, I'm not super convinced by these types of hand traps right now. But Ghost Bell, I think, is one of the ones that I've liked the most out of the bunch because in theory, it has some pretty solid applications. It's, of course, a very high value card against Mitsurugi. It's a pretty solid card against Draco Tail, but only when you're going second, pretty much. But negating specifically Draco Tail Flame or Sting or Horn, I think is really nice, especially now that the Ketu is limited. A realistic win con against Draco Tail when you're going second is to let them combo, and then you can outgrind because they run out of spell traps maybe. So I've been liking it. I think it's a solid card, but I don't think it has the highest priority. But I've been liking it more than trying to negate my opponent's stuff with Veiler or Mourner, or Imperm for that matter. Which Imperm, I guess to complete the set of negations, I think Imperm still, all things considered, is the most solid negation next to Mourner and Veiler. Even though Called By is at 1, can't get Called By, doesn't trigger Izuna, so I really like having it as a failsafe against the Draco Tail matchup. Of course, if you're playing a deck like Draco Tail, you have to consider the fact that it's not a monster. But I've been liking Imperm as a whole. You know, negating Arthalion is solid in the Draco Tail matchup. Negating Crocia is good against Radiant Typhoon. Negating any K9 stuff is good. Solid card against Lunalight as well. Honestly, like Bell, Imperm, Ash are the three like negation hand traps that I felt like were acceptable. The others I felt were really lackluster personally, but yeah. Cherries gets a maybe. There's a couple of implications for this card in certain matchups. I think I've thought about it. I think taking away the Radiant Typhoon link too can be pretty annoying for them. Of course, you need extra deck space to do this. Not every deck can. Ghost Reaper on Arthalion, I think, is actually decent now. Because if they have to put Arthalion back with one of the traps... So think about it this way, okay? Of course, you're going -1 with Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries in order to banish the Arthalions, right? But you basically get that card advantage back in the grand scheme of things because they're making a fusion that isn't Arthalion. So whatever fusion monster they make does not give them cards back right away. So you're losing a card, but they're also losing some cards. And then later down the line, when they activate a trap card, they can recycle the Arthalion with it, put it back into the extra deck, but then they're not recycling the other spell traps. So now they have an Arthalion again, but they're running out of spell traps, and they only have one Arthalion. So I think that's maybe something to explore, but I'm not sure if it's good enough, all things considered. It gets a maybe from me, but I don't think it's outrageous to consider and try it. Psyframes. This is not just Gamma, this is also Delta. I think Psyframes are solid. Once again, I'm not the biggest fan of trying to negate all of my opponent's plays in this format. It still plays into some of the K9 stuff. Like if I Gamma a Ripper, they can still summon Izuna. If I Delta Chaotic Elements, there's still a chance they can play. So I'm not sure what the best way to go about Gamma is. The nice thing about Gamma is that you can use Gamma on Izuna, and if they negate it, then it stays in hand and you can still use it later. So that's probably the best way to use it against K9, is just use it on Izuna and force them into a really awkward spot. Either they let their Izuna die, or you negate something else later. I think that's neat. Delta is pretty solid against all decks that try to play with spells. Like Mitsurugi, Delta is pretty solid. And against Draco Tail, it can help. But all things considered, obviously, considering you have to play Driver for it as well, and it's only really good going second, I'm not a big fan of Psyframes, but they are solid. Bestials. Bestials are okay. I mean, specifically Magnamute, I think is always good to have. The other ones are not great, so I think some decks can consider playing like one Magna. Like in Draco Tail, for example, I think it's completely okay to play the Magna because there's still, even though you're not going to get a ton of value from it, like banishing an Albion so they don't get the Fallen and the Virtuous is pretty solid in the mirror, and then you still search follow-up. So I like the one of Magnamute. Honestly, if it was just Magnamute, I would probably put it in strong. If we're talking Bestials altogether, then I think they go in solid. Yeah, you can play Magna in Radiant Typhoon to search Sheena, which is okay. Like if you're going second and you activate Magnamute on like an Albion, you prevent Fallen and the Virtuous, and you can search Sheena. That's pretty high value. The only downside it has in Radiant Typhoon compared to Draco Tail is it cannot search Engine. Right? In Draco Tail, it searches whatever you want. You can search Mululu if you want Draco Tail engine. You can search Fallen of White if you want that engine. And you can search Pan or Urgula if you already have a way to fuse and you want good fusion materials. So like the utility of Magnamute in Draco Tail is phenomenal. In Radiant Typhoon, it's still a solid card, but not quite as good. And in other decks, Bestials, I think, are just like average non-engine, but not bad. Don't play Skullmeister, almost no impact on the games, definitely not enough. Don't play DD Crow, not great right now. I should probably exclude Skullmeister. I feel like every time I just put it in the lowest category. I don't know. I just have a folder full of hand traps, like all these pictures, and I throw them all in, and sometimes I wonder like, why is this card still here? I'm sure there is applications for DD Crow. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are things that you can DD Crow that are nice. The problem is, are you actually winning the game if you DD Crow an Albion the Branded Dragon to stop the Fallen and the Virtuous access in the end phase? The answer is probably not, because they still have all the other things that they've made. Yes, you can DD Crow a Phimena when they try to add it back with Urgula. Sure, that's not the worst. But does it win you the game? I don't know. I really don't think so. So yeah, maybe DD Crow gets a maybe, but Skullmeister is not viable. Retaliating Sea. I'm gonna say it. I think Retaliating Sea is a little bit underrated against Draco Tail. I think people are underestimating Retaliating Sea right now. People are under the impression that because the Fallen of the White Dragon is now out, the deck is not that weak to Retaliating Sea anymore. I will say to an extent that is true. It is not an auto win against Draco Tail, but it does generate a lot of advantage for you. I think if you are specifically worried about the Draco Tail matchup, I think Retaliating Sea is a strong option, and I think it is severely underrated because of the new cards like playing around it. I do not think it's like, even if you start, let's say your opponent starts Fallen of the White Dragon, summons the Ecclesia, tags out, like makes the Ecclesia synchro, tags out into Cartesia, activates Cartesia, fuses 2 Draco Tails from hand, and you're not preventing any of that at all, okay? Cartesia resolves, they summon Arthalion with the 2 graveyard effects, they get Ketu and Rahu, they activate Ketu, search 1, activate Rahu, and then you're Retaliating Sea. Yes, they've played. You haven't won the game yet, but that's still a lot of value. And it depends what deck you're playing, because one major problem that I've found with Retaliating Sea in certain decks is that it's really annoying to play while that card is still on the field for some strategies. Like if you have Retaliating on the field and you play Draco Tail yourself, like that can just be annoying. You might have to go like battle phase and crash it or something to even play the game. And at that point, it feels really weak to me if I have to do that, right? If I have to like crash my own Retaliating just to play the game, then it's bad. But if my deck can actually use the Retaliating Sea or just not care about it, then I like it. So I do think the card is underrated. I do think it's strong. I think it shouldn't be underestimated. And it's definitely strong against Draco Tail. And one thing I like about it is that it also covers Lunalight. It's a good card against Lunalight, unironically. And it also happens to beat Sky Striker, so please don't play it. But no, there's other decks like Lunalight, Sky Striker, Branded. Pretty sure against Gem Knights it's okay. You've got Memento in here. Like you'll randomly encounter matchups where the card is just good. And then we've got the banish thingies. Chaos Hunter is not good because Malice is gone. Lancia gets a maybe. And this is just because I don't think there's going to be a lot of Malice, but there's a few other things that you could argue Lancia is not bad against. Like, for example, it is one of the better hand traps if you want to be safe from Lunalight. So if you are a little bit uncertain about how many Lunalights or Malice people are still going to play, and Orchist, you could just like throw the Lancia into your side deck to like better be safe than sorry if you have the room for it. It's not the worst against Crystron, K9 Crystron specifically. Of course, K9 in general not, but Crystron maybe. So not completely useless. I think Chaos Hunter just is a little bit too weak for those matchups and not as reliable. So I think Chaos Hunter just stops seeing play entirely. But Lancia as a safety net for some of those matchups, I think is still okay. Phantasme. Phantasme is a... I mean, I love Phantasme. You guys know this. I never main decked this card in this format because it's just not good against Draco Tail specifically. However, it's a pretty solid card to advance your game state a little bit against Radiant Typhoon, Sky Striker. It's not as bad for the side deck if you wanted to do it. I don't think it's particularly high priority. It's probably down the line a little bit. Probably it's more like this, yeah. But it's not completely useless. K9. And of course, when we're talking K9, we're just talking about Izuna as a whole. I think Izuna is definitely still a solid card. You have applications for it in most matchups. You know, we're talking Draco Tail, definitely usable. Against K9, it helps. Radiant Typhoon usually triggers it with Crocea. Against Lunalight, it'll be live. Against Mitsu, it'll be live. Against Crystron, it'll be live. So I think it's definitely a solid card. Maybe even strong. I like it because it kind of toes the line between the two things that I've said earlier, right? Like, it doesn't stop your opponent from playing completely, but it helps you advance your position while interrupting the opponent a little bit. Like, let's say you play against Draco Tail and you summon Izuna to make Valon, and then Valon books one of their monsters, and that can be inconvenient for them, right? Like, let's say they start with the Fallen of the White Dragon, and you immediately summon Izuna and like book something to stop them from making the synchro right away. That can be annoying. But then also you expose the Valon to like getting hit with like the Albaz fusion, maybe. That could be inconvenient. But at the same time, you are also creating a Valon on the board, which can be threatening the Draco Tail Flame, as well as it hits the graveyard. So like, I like that it's more like removal based and also advances your own board state. Also, one thing that is not to be underestimated is that the Lupus stays in rotation. So even if they can deal with the Izuna, like the Exceed that it summoned, the Lupus will be available to you next turn. The biggest downside of this card is another card that a lot of people are going to be playing, and that is the Fallen and the Virtuous. The Fallen and the Virtuous we're going to talk about in a second, actually. Let's do this after the hand traps immediately. This card is very popular this format, and if they just Fallen and the Virtuous pop the Lupus, that's gone for the rest of the game, right? So that is annoying. So I guess one thing you could do with Izuna, this is something that it really depends on your hand, and there's more skill ceiling to this card, is you can wait for your opponent to combo, and then when they set the Fallen and the Virtuous, because they're about to go into the end phase, you can activate the Izuna and punish them for that. That is just one way to do it, but there's a lot of potential with Izuna in this format, and I've been liking it. You can just play Lupus at multiples. That's something that's worked in the past with like Typhon, and then make Zeus with it. That's all things that you can do. So I'm a fan of the Izuna Lupus package. I liked it. Thoughts about making Zenmayu at the end of the main phase? Also something you can do, right? You can go Izuna Lupus, make Zenmayu, and then pop like Flame and Sting immediately or whatever. That's solid. Droll and Lockbird. Compared to what this card used to be, I feel like it's fallen off. I still have a hard time putting it too low because it does give you this sort of like safety net against some of the decks, but let's really think about this, okay? Draco Tail, not that valuable. Vanquisol K9 and Crystron K9, it's potentially good, but if you are unlucky and they start with the K9 cards immediately, then they just Ripper negate it. So I don't think it's that reliable against it. Radiant Typhoon usually does a lot of its searches in the draw phase to play around Roland Lockbird, which is really annoying. It's good against Sky Striker, good against Lunalight, good against Mitsurugi, unless they have Prayers plus Tribute in draw phase as well. So there's ways to play around it for those decks as well. Personally, I don't think it's main deck worthy, but it's a solid side deck card for like the K9 matchups and for Sky Striker, Lunalight, White Forest, that type of stuff. Ryziel, on a mat, whatever. Like I think it's a solid side deck card, but I would not main deck it right now. I'm not a big fan of it. I mean, I'm never a big fan of Roland Lockbird, but there's been formats where I was like, okay, you definitely need it, like Ryziel Mitsurugi or whatever, or against Yamimitsu. It was definitely stronger than it is right now. So I'm happy to say that Roland Lockbird I don't think is going to be everywhere this format. Songs of the Dominators is a solid card if you can play it. I mean, you know, if your deck can play Songs of the Dominators, it's probably okay, because like luckily for Songs of the Dominators, Imperm and the Dominus traps are higher quality than the other hand traps in the format. So if you can lean into that concept more, then I think it'd be okay. Like playing 3 Imperm, 3 Songs, and Purge or Impulse, depending on what your deck plays, is I think an okay approach, right? Not the biggest fan of that approach altogether, because I don't like too many hand traps right now, but it's okay. Yeah, decks like Sky Striker could play Songs of the Dominators with one of the Dominus cards. It's been done in the past, but I'm not sure if I like it over playing other thingies. The Fallen and the Virtuous is my favorite card this format so far. It's kind of a cold take because everyone's playing it already. It's not like I'm telling you something new, but I think this card is top tier. Maybe even rivaling Fuba. This card, there's one thing I know about my YCS Dortmund deck. There's one thing I know, and I know that card is going to be in there. That card is going to be in my deck for YCS Dortmund. I have no idea which deck it's going to be, whether it's, I don't know, Draco Tail, Radiant Typhoon, Sky Striker. I have no idea what it is, but I love this card. I think it's so fun to play with. I think it's awesome that a destroy one card on the field somehow has made its way into modern Yu-Gi-Oh! I think if anything, that is a great sign for the format, that you actually play a card that's like destroy one card on the field and is actually playable. The reason why this card is so good, in my opinion, is because the format is grindy. Believe it or not, the format is grindy right now. Decks like, we've talked about it earlier, decks like Radiant Typhoon, decks like Draco Tail, even Vanquish Soul, like you can't stop these decks from playing entirely. It's just not consistent. I know all the hand trap Andes are gonna be sad that they can't just like Imperm Ash Veiler the opponent and just pass like in their beloved Snake Eye format. But it doesn't work this format. You're gonna have to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And this card is great whenever Yu-Gi-Oh! Is being played, because it's a simple thing, quick play interaction, so many applications, and it creates follow-up. It's a phenomenal card in grindy games. And of course, when you draw it as your only non-engine going second, it's not great, and you're not going to win the game just off of it. But it has so many different things it can do, right? You can dodge Draco Tail Flame. You can dodge the MST negation, like by hitting the continuous trap or hitting your own card or whatever. Like you can chain block with it as well. You can use it on their monsters if there's anything you care about. You can use it on floodgates. You can use it on. You can use it going first by just setting it. Even the secondary effect of it comes up sometimes now that people actually play Ecclesia. So this card is just phenomenal. Does everything. Card is phenomenal. I've been a big fan of this card. I think every single deck that I've been liking in the format so far has been playing this card. And I've been loving the approach of, like, for example, in the Draco Tail matchup, I would Fuba them or Perulia them, or I would Ash the Rahu, and then on my turn I would like use the Fallen and the Virtuous to dodge the Draco Tail Flame, and then I would just enter a grind game from there and try to win from that perspective. That's been very enjoyable for me, and that's been how I've also had the most success this format. Whenever I tried decks that rely on hand trapping the opponent too much, that didn't work for me. And whenever I tried like pure board breaker approaches, that also wasn't always working. So this card, I think, excels really in those hybrids. And once again, it is one of those board breaker type cards that also works when you're going first, like similar to cards like Droplet or Forbidden Crown, which we're going to talk about in a bit as well. Big fan of this card, been loving it. Lava Golem in Sphere Mode, and I guess Kaijus. The category that I like to call tributing your opponent's shit. I left out Kurikara because I don't think it's a real card. We've been discussing Kurikara every single tier list for the last years, and it's never seen play, so I decided to leave it off, which I probably should do with Skullmeister as well, but alas, Kaijus, not impactful enough. Unless you can search it to out like a Liger, I guess. If you play like, I don't know, dinosaurs and you can search Dogoran, then sure, why not? Play one. But generically, not very good. I think there's a reason to play like the light Kaiju maybe in Draco Tail if you play Branded Fusion, you know? Okay, you know what? In fringe cases, I'll give it a maybe. For basically, if the Kaiju is searchable, then play one. That's fine. You can play one if you want to respect Lunalight, but don't play like 3 Kaijus because you're trying to draw them. That's not something you should do. Lava Golem and Sphere Mode actually are decent this format, I think. They are not like the craziest cards. I'm gonna throw them in solid, but there are some decks right now that don't necessarily need their normal summon, and having one of these two as like a failsafe against Lunalight and some other combo decks in the format, like for example, let's say you decide to play a board breaker power spell Radiant Typhoon deck, okay? And you are really afraid of Lunalight and Canine Crystron summoning Spell Canceller, right? These two cards are your friends, right? Radiant Typhoon doesn't need the normal summon, and you can solve those problems if you draw those cards. At least you now have a realistic win condition against those matchups should you be going second after siding. So it's worth considering in those particular matchups and those particular decks that don't rely on their normal summon. You know, you could play this in those. So those are solid. Called by. I mean, Called by is always a strong card, I guess, if you can play it. I mean, it's just the reason why most decks don't main deck it these days is because it's not great going second. It's just good going first. So that is that. But most combo decks are definitely going to side deck this card for going first. And I mean, it's still a top tier card. You're just not going to main deck it all the time if you're worried about going second. Some decks are gonna main deck it, like I don't know, Sky Striker, Lunalight, combo piles like the K9 decks might main deck it, but yeah, I mean it's Called by. It's got its obvious applications. Crossout is a decent bit worse than Called by the Grave, simply because you also have to have the targets in the deck. So if you're like siding Crossout and you're worried about Fuba, you have to keep a Fuba in your deck going first, which is kind of bad. So Crossout is weaker than Called by, but for what it does, it's still a very busted card, right? Spell and trap removal is pretty okay. There's two aspects here. We've got Duster and Lightning Storm, which have applications in certain approaches. For example, what I have seen people do against Radiant Typhoon and Draco Tail is let them combo, then activate one of these, which don't win the game on the spot, but if you can make them resolve, you at least get rid of some of the problems. Like, for example, you need to pair Duster and Lightning Storm with, for example, a Ash Blossom to negate Flame, or Fallen of the Virtuous to negate Flame, right? If you can pull that off, Duster plus Ash against Draco Tail Flame, you also get rid of Sting, Horn, Fallen and the Virtuous. Pretty neat if you can pull that off. So if your deck already centers around a lot of like dodges for those cards, like if you're playing Ash, Fallen, Droplet, whatever, then you can consider playing them. But I think it's worth noting that that play doesn't even win you the game from that spot, right? Like they still have Pymena, Ecclesia and the Black Dragon, maybe a Secretariat on the board, Gulamel might be on the board. Like there's still a lot of things you have to go through if you have this 2-card combination to beat the back row. So because the back row is not everything, I'm not a huge fan of Duster and Lightning Storm, but in certain approaches they can work. So I don't hate them either. Cosmic Cyclone, on the other hand, and to an extent, I guess, Mystical Space Typhoon, but Mystical Space Typhoon usually is worse than Cosmic unless you're playing Radiant Typhoon, is also pretty solid. I like Cosmic for a couple of reasons. This card actually could see some play, I think, and that's also, I think, something that speaks for the format. This card gets rid of a lot in Radiant Typhoon. If you haven't tested against Radiant Typhoon, you might not be aware how much of a big deal this is. If you can resolve a Cosmic Cyclone on the Radiant Typhoon trap, that is really good. Because they cannot get it back from banished. So the way this goes, right, is you activate a spell card that they want to negate. So they chain MST. You say, okay. Then they chain the trap card to negate your card. Then you chain Cosmic on the trap. If they want to keep the trap around, they have to chain another MST onto their trap. Then it goes to the graveyard. And then they can either set it back with its own effect, or they can replace it if they still have the link to. So in order for it to not get banished, they have to chain another MST to it. And what you get from this exchange is actually quite valuable, because think about it. Like if we go through that entire chain, they've lost 2 cards. You've lost 2 cards, but you resolved your spell, right? So you only lose 1 card. You lose the Cosmic, but you resolve your spell because you stopped the trap card from resolving because it's not on the field anymore, right? So I think that exchange is pretty good against Radiant Typhoon. I think this card is pretty solid against Radiant Typhoon. Against Draco Tail, this card is a little bit worse than like Mystical Space Typhoon or Fallen at the Virtuous, because yes, you can dodge Draco Tail Flame with it, but your spell gets banished, which depending on the deck maybe matters, maybe doesn't matter. Ultimately, I think the thing that matters the most is you are dodging Draco Tail Flame. Double Cyclone would be better for this. Double Cyclone would be better for this. Double Cyclone is also viable in the Radiant Typhoon matchup. The only difference is Double Cyclone doesn't force them to chain the MST, because Double Cyclone destroys the trap and they really don't want it to be banished. So if you chain Double Cyclone, they just let it go, right? They just let it go, and then they activate another spell, then they put it back with the Link monster, and then they can still negate with their other MST. That's speaking about the full setup, right? So Cosmic against Radiant Typhoon, I think, is significantly better. Double Cyclone is significantly better against the thing. Double Cyclone, go for a set, though. You can go after a set, right? Because the trap won't negate because your target is gone. Yeah, okay. No, it's also fine. Yeah. Your spell is gone. Yeah. If they end on the Link monster, the trap will come back, though, right? But yeah, no, both Cosmic and Double Cyclone. Actually, I didn't include Double Cyclone now that you mention it. I think both Cosmic and Double Cyclone are solid for those matchups. So if you are going a board breaker approach against Radiant Typhoon and Draco Tail, then I think Cosmic and or Double Cyclone are both pretty solid options. I'm gonna rate them a bit higher, actually. Forbidden Droplet. Been a top tier card in my experience so far. I've been loving this card. You get to do a lot of the things that we just talked about, dodging Draco Tail Flame, dodging the Radiant Typhoon trap card, but at the same time, this card is great against the combo decks as well, right? Like, it's great against the grindy decks like Radiant Typhoon and Draco Tail, but it's also phenomenal against, of course, any combo board except for Spell Canceller. If you're up against Spell Canceller with a board breaker approach, then I guess you're cooked. But in all other cases, this card is pretty phenomenal. Great card. Works going first. Is a little bit worse going first, of course, but really strong going second. Great value. You should be playing this card only if your deck has a lot of spells and only if your deck can break boards. Because realistically, against Draco Tail, like, even after a massive droplet, you still need to be grinding and winning the game. You are usually not auto winning off of the droplet, and most importantly, that's one of the most important things about this format in general. Both Radiant Typhoon and Draco Tail are incredibly hard to kill on your first turn when you're going second. Like, even if you have the craziest board breakers, even if you have like Ash or like a droplet to dodge the flame, and then you have Ash for the sting as well, like all of that, you're probably still not killing that deck, because they got Phimena, they got Fallen of the Virtuous, they got Ecclesia into Albaz. Like, they're not dying, okay? You have to outgrind them, but Droplet is amazing at that, because it gets you into that position, and then your engine needs to carry. Basically, Droplet is the best way to enable your engine this format, because it works against basically every deck unless it's Liger Dancer or Spell Canceller. Everything else, it really is good at enabling your engine to play the game. So I've been a big fan of Droplet. Whether it's Radiant Typhoon or Sky Striker, of course, in Draco Tail I didn't play it because it's not a monster, but in those decks, great card. Super Poly. Super Poly is good. I like Super Poly. It's got value against Radiant Typhoon. It's got value against Draco Tail. It requires extra deck space, which not every deck can facilitate, but really strong card in my opinion. Really good going first. Going second, a little bit more situational, but I really like making Secretarion Dragon in defense mode against Draco Tail. Really makes it hard for them to effectively use their cards because they have to like fuse into something using away Pan or Mululu, which Mululu is just a one-of, and Pan is also often a one-of, so they might not have it. And if they don't have it, then the Secretarion in defense mode is really tough because, you know, no Albaz to fuse with it. Like, basically, there's Fallen and the Virtuous for the Secretarion, which if you can bait that out first, phenomenal. But even if you can't, then you're still outing two monsters and you're forcing the Fallen onto this. Of course, it's better if your deck has good discards, so on and so forth, but been a fan of Super Polymerization. Not a fan of board clears like Raigeki. I think that just doesn't do enough, personally, is my opinion. Dark Ruler No More is a niche card. Not a huge fan of it in the popular matchups. It's not good against, I mean, not good against Draco Tail, not good against Radiant Typhoon, not good against Lunalight. Okay against Mitsu, okay against Vanquish Soul, but they still have the Trap and Holy Sue and Izuna and stuff, so not the greatest. Against K9 Crystron, it would be phenomenal, but they play Spell Canceller often, so it's just very... It's basically if you want to cover rogue decks. If you want to cover rogue decks, sure. But not a high priority in my opinion, Dark Ruler. Talents. I've been liking Talents as a one-of in decks that play well with Engine, because it's just like, you know, the good old play into their board and then draw 2 extra cards. Basically, when you're... when you're going second... and you can play, and it's not too late because your opponent has made an auto-win board, then Talents is pretty good. And that is, I think, relatively common in this format. Not the highest priority of non-engine, but for most decks, I would recommend the one-of if it's not like Draco Tail. Pretty solid card for me. Change of Heart, no impact. I included it because it just recently went to 3, but not going to play that. Let's do Floodgates later. We've got Evenly Matched. Evenly Matched has potential in this format. It is situational. And here's a few things to note about Evenly Matched. People are really looking into Evenly Matched at the moment because they want to counter Draco Tail with it. Because one of the most efficient ways to outgrind Draco Tail is by resolving evenly, and then they lose their spell traps. Most of their traps are gone after evenly, and that's really good. Here's the problem. People in the TCG, because Branded Fusion is at 2, almost everyone is playing Branded Draco Tail with Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, and if they want to play around evenly, which a lot of people want to, they just make Sanctifier going first, and that's tough. So that's not great for Evenly Matched. And then the other thing is... against Radiant Typhoon, where the card also has a lot of potential, they have negates for it because of the MSTs and the continuous trap. So the same thing applies to Lightning Storm and Feather Duster. They need, like, you need a card to pair with evenly to even make sure it resolves. And the same is true against Draco Tail. Yes, if you have a Bell, you can Bell the Sanctifier and then evenly the board, for example. That works. You can maybe even, like, Crown the Sanctifier or Droplet the Sanctifier and then evenly. That also works. Or you can, like, I guess you would Droplet away the thing that they give you with Sanctifier and then evenly after, but it's neither here nor there. There's ways to make evenly resolve. But you need to draw those other ways to make evenly resolve if you want to lean into this strategy. If you're already playing Droplet, Bell, Crown, whatever in your main deck, evenly is completely fine and valid, in my opinion. Fenrir is not impactful enough. Maybe as a going first side deck card, I could see it in certain decks, like maybe Draco Tail, because you still care about Retaliating Sea, want to make sure you can banish it once it hits the board, but it kind of hurts me to put Fenrir under DD Crow. If DD Crow makes it into the bottom of maybe, then Fenrir can go into the bottom of maybe as well, but Ultimate Slayer. Ultimate Slayer, I think, is decent as an out to Draco Tail Flame, because you can send Entis And then it puts them into... I guess they just activate Sting then, though. They just Sting the Entis before it can trigger, but then you're just forcing the Sting. It's not great. Yeah. Slayer is like bottom of maybe as well. Like, I can see some applications. Sending Garura or Entis against Draco Tail. Sending... It's nice that it's cost when it sends, right? It's like a budget version of the Fallen and the Virtuous, basically, because it's not a quick play spell and it can't destroy every card. It relies on your opponent's board a little bit of what it can do, but all right. I'm assuming if your deck can play Orange Light, then you just play it. Only if you have good discards for it, I would say. I'm not the biggest fan of Orange Light in general. Triple Tactics Thrust is a solid card right now in the right deck, of course. Like, it depends. It's not the craziest thing, especially now that D-Barrier and Featherstorm are gone. You can still set different Dimension Ground, which we're going to talk about in a second, for the Draco Tail matchup or some other matchups, but there isn't really that one trap right now that wins every matchup. So going first, it's losing a lot of viability. The Black Goat Laughs is there, but that card is also not great in every matchup. I think Thrust is okay in the right concept, but mostly for going second. I don't think it's great going first. Metaltronus. Metaltronus gets a maybe. This card has potential in the Draco Tail mirror. Being an out to Secretarion Dragon is nice. Also, being able to answer Altarion is pretty neat on your turn, but also on your opponent's turn. So I don't hate this card at all, but I just think it probably loses out in comparisons to all the other cards up here. And it's simply like, here, the cards in the maybe category, right? Like, if you look at cards like, let's say Lancia, or Cherries, or a Kaiju, right? Or Dark Ruler. If these cards do what you play them for, then they actually win you the game, right? They turn maybe an unlosable situation into like an auto win. Like, if your opponent makes one Liger and you have the Kaiju, you go from losing the game to winning the game. If you play against Malice and you draw Lancia, you go from losing the game to winning the game. Combo pile that loses to Dark Ruler, you have Dark Ruler, you win the game. If whatever scenario you think of for Cherries actually happens, then Cherries wins you the game. Metaltronus is more like, okay, I'm happy I was able to use it. Have I won the game now? Not really, but it was cool. So I don't know. I think for a situational card, I would want it to do more. If that makes sense. I wanted to bring up these two cards because they are kind of popular right now in what I'm seeing, but at the same time, there are floodgates, so the discussion on these is not as interesting. It's Di-Fi and different Dimension Ground, and the obvious thing to say about floodgates is, yes, if you play these cards against a deck that can't beat them, then they're good. They win the game. You're welcome. Overall, both of these just get a solid from me because they are, luckily, not good in that many matchups. Like, they're good against Lunalight and Draco Tail. And Crystron, I guess, in the top tier category. Every other deck doesn't care about them that much, which is simultaneously the reason why they're seeing play and also why they're just solid, right? These cards shouldn't exist because it just makes it so that one half of these decks just plays them. Radiant Typhoon, Mitsu, Sky Striker can, you know, Vanquish Soul technically could. So like one half of these decks plays them and the other half loses to them, which is just awesome, right? But yeah, well, basically that. And then we've got two new additions to the tier list. We've got Sheena and Forbidden Crown from Burst Protocol. Sheena is, in my opinion, a strong card. I am surprised that, like, not everyone is playing it in Radiant Typhoon. At the same time, when I have played it, you know, it is a little bit situational. It doesn't help you win every single game. But I thought it was a great card in Radiant Typhoon specifically. So I think Sheena falls into like the same vein as Dominus Purge, where like not every deck can play it, but if your deck can play it, it is a very strong consideration. And I personally have liked it, and it's cool because we can compare these two directly because both of them can see play in Radiant Typhoon. And in my personal experience, I preferred Sheena over Purge, but it is close. And Radiant Typhoon is a deck that is pretty full with like cards. It doesn't have a lot of space. It doesn't have a lot of luxury of like playing non-engine. So it's tough to decide between the two, but I've been liking Sheena more than Purge because it just feels like a more dynamic card. It feels like you can find more spots to use it, and Purge is more like, well, if I can negate a really important thing, it's good, and if my opponent has more than that, then it's not great. So I've been a bigger fan of Sheena, mostly also just because it's more fun. And then we have Forbidden Crown. I personally love this card so far, but that's also because I've been playing decks where it's really good. Like, I've been messing around with Sky Striker, I've been messing around with Radiant Typhoon. Like, I like this card a lot because of its flexibility. And this is simultaneously why it's good, and why it's also a little weird is because it does so many things at once. Each individual thing that this card does is not that crazy, but if you add them all together, I'm a big fan of the flexibility that the card gives you. Whenever you draw it, you have different applications for it. Big fan of that. But there is a chance that if you play this format and you test this format, that maybe you find that there is another card that just solves more problems for you. For example, let's say you're playing Radiant Typhoon and space is tight, you don't have that much non-engine, and you find yourself struggling with Dracotail Flame too much because you don't consistently have ways to dodge it. You might decide to play Dominus Purge over Forbidden Crown because Dominus Purge has a very specific application, and if you figure out that that one specific thing is a problem that you want to solve, then maybe Dominus Purge is better. Because Forbidden Crown doesn't have that one particular purpose, right? Like, you're not putting this card into your deck to do that one thing. You're just putting it in there because it's good in a lot of spots, and it's a quick play spell, so it's got synergies with Radiant Typhoon, right? I'm a big fan of this card. I think it's underestimated or underrated. I think a lot of people are playing other cards for specific purposes, which I understand. I agree. Like, there's cards that have more targeted uses than Forbidden Crown, which might ultimately make them better, or a better choice rather, but I still think this card is really strong if your deck can afford to play it. So that is that. So that's how I feel about the current format. It's, to me, in my first testing, it's felt like a very interactive format. So as you can see, with the exception of Purge, Impulse, and Ash, I'm rating a lot of interactive cards really highly. Like cards like Droplet, Fallen the Virtuous, the Molcharmies, Forbidden Crown, Sheena, Izuna, Super Poly, Retaliating Sea. A lot of those cards are all about like letting your opponent play a little bit, but then interacting with certain choke points and then like grinding it out from there. That's been my experience of this format so far. I've been enjoying that type of play style, so that's what my evaluation is based on here. There's a chance that someone finds a crazy combo brew once again, or maybe K9 Crystron happens to be the best deck again after the next YCS, and then we all have to go back to playing Imperm Veiler, Ash, Purge, Bell, Nibiru, a Charmy or two. But for now, with Dracotail, Radiant Typhoon, and stuff like that, I've been enjoying these kind of cards. So yeah, let me know what you think.